Arrigo Sacchi once said that football is the most important of all the unimportant things. I don't think that's quite right. See, I think when we take a closer look, I think we're going to discover that it is quite an important thing. Wars, disease, famine, economics, labor, culture, religion, equality, art. The thing is, football is often intertwined with, or even the direct cause of some of those forces too. And I think the motivation to view it as an unimportant thing is to avoid the insensitivity to the suffering of our fellow human. How could you be talking about the Champions League final at a moment when bombs are being dropped on schools? That makes football an unimportant thing. People have bled, spent, cried, and died over this game. See, I think the truth is that sometimes football is the cause of these sufferings, and sometimes it's the salve. I think the game is neither good nor bad, but kind of an indicator about us. Who are we? How do we live? How did we live? What are we trying to do? What were we trying to do? Where were we? What were our motivations? Why were we there at all? I think we can see the residue of our shared human history in nearly every corner of our game. And I think we can see our game all throughout history. It is an important thing, and in loose reference to the legendary Danny Rojas, the game is life. So there's this statue in Rio de Janeiro of Pele, one of the most iconic players in the history of the game, battling for a ball against the Chinese Emperor Han Wu-di. The Emperor is decked out in full imperial robes, and for my money is in a far better position to win the ball than one of the greatest footballers ever. A fine clearance from the Emperor on this play, I say. But it does leave one wondering, what's going on here? Why is there a quite large statue of a Chinese emperor besting Pele in one of the most iconic footballing cities in the most iconic footballing country in the world? What's this thing doing here? And what does the Han Emperor have to do with anything? Is this just the world's most grandiose footballing non sequitur? Not quite. Quite a lot had to happen to put that statue in that city, in that country, with that particular iconography. It turns out that the Beijing municipal government commissioned this statue, and it was installed in July of 2016. The statue is formally known as the China-Brazil Friendship Soccer Match, and it was given as a gift. How very nice of Beijing to graciously hand over this bronze cast, showing Brazil's greatest footballer getting bested by your ancient emperor. I'm sure there's no other motivation here. Well, football statues are kind of a thing around the world. Often these statues sit outside stadia or major landmarks, usually depicting the legends of a club in some moment of basking glory or depicting some iconic moment from their transcendently important career. They're a celebration of the game, sure, but also of an individual. Beckham's statues celebrate David Beckham. Salah's statue celebrates Salah. Chastain's statue celebrates her iconic moment and her victory. Ronaldo's celebrate Ronaldo. Henri's celebrate Henri. It's just kind of a thing. We celebrate individual brilliance, transcendent ability, and singular talents. A player can be bigger than a club. A player can be the face of a nation. An individual can and often will be celebrated for their individual genius. This mentality about sports figures displays our tendency to look for a champion, a hero, a legend, a person we can celebrate. And because of this tendency, we might find it difficult to imagine it being any other way. But Chinese footballing statues, well, they're just a little different. They don't depict the legends of the game or any particular individual at all, typically. Stride and Vandenberg published an academic paper in 2018 exploring what they called the art of face saving and culture changing related to footballing statues. They noticed that Chinese footballing statues tended to depict anonymous figures who were shown in the middle of a daring hard tackle, or they would display a collective engaged in a broader struggle or battle. In fact, 72% of China's statues identified displayed more than one player. These differences aren't just particularities, they're windows into mentalities. Beckham stands alone outside LA Galaxy Stadium because we mean to celebrate that man and his impact on that place. We place him outside as a figurehead, as a hero, as a legend. So one might ask, is there some motivation to avoid showing Chinese players in this way? Why aren't there statues depicting Sun Jiai or Wu Li, two of the most successful Chinese football players in history? One of the foundational decisions a leader of a people must make is how to treat heroes within their society. A hero might take on a Messi-like role, serving as a source of joy, at least once he finally won the World Cup. A source of joy and national pride for a population. The appeal is obvious. The more our people rally around the one figure, the more we are agreeably co-participating in one thing. In this case, the figure is Messi, and he allows the population to rally around the one thing that is Argentina. When the population coheres around one idea, definitionally, we avoid fracturing and infighting. So a leader might be quite motivated to celebrate these individuals as national symbols, as a means of helping the population to coalesce into one unified thing. Now, every nation needs symbols. I mean, what is a nation except for a collective agreement that we are a one thing? It's a mentality. So it becomes quite important for leaders to support that one thing mentality amongst its people. It's a guard against civil war or secession. Every nation needs to do this. Hell, the Americans did this with its postal service in the 19th century. If you have someone living in a remote Western territory, there's very little around them that would symbolize their belonging to America. So, building a building with a big flag out front offering a service that connects that person to the whole does a whole lot to support the concept that you are a part of this bigger thing. So what's the problem with heroes then? Well, some leaders of people might discover that the hero becomes antagonistic toward the leadership. Sometimes in history, a leader of people will decide that celebrating an individual above the collective is a potential threat to their leadership, and this individualism is forcibly or subtly dispersed across the collective. So think about them statues, eh? If the contemporary Chinese government has a motivation to celebrate the game of football and encourage others to participate in it, but does not trust the impulse to identify and amplify heroes above the collective, well, then one might just want to build statues of anonymous figures or ancient emperors instead of star strikers. It's safer, you see. We don't reap the benefits of rallying around a hero, but we don't risk that hero turning the populace against us. We still celebrate the game, but we celebrate the game, not the person. And remember, too, that these Chinese statues were often depicting collective battles or hard tackles. The powerful elites are demonstrating to us what aspect of the game they want to depict and embody the Chinese people. Collectivism, togetherness, but also toughness and grit. When you think of it that way, you can start to understand how some of these characteristics of nations or people come to be. The leaders themselves have a massive hand in shaping how a people is displayed. And carefully displaying the people the way you mean to tells others who you are, but it also tells the very people themselves who they are meant to be. Victories and successes are ours, not yours, and we will celebrate us and our history, not you. Different cultures have a greater or lesser appetite for individual celebration. That means that the relationship between football and its heroes may look quite different in different places throughout history. Why a David Beckham statue outside LA Galaxy Stadium? We mean to celebrate that man. Why an anonymous collective of footballers outside a training pitch in China? We mean to celebrate the collective effort and national unity. We mean to celebrate toughness and grit. But I still haven't quite explained why a Han Emperor is snagging the ball off of Pele's foot in Rio. Well, that goes even deeper. When a government deploys its warships or its bombs, when it sanctions its foe or tariffs their imports, that government is displaying what's known as hard power. It's a way of directly and coercively affecting another nation. But this isn't the only way of affecting another nation. Endearing its people to your culture is another subtle and powerful means of influence known as soft power. Soft power is all about attraction, prestige, admiration, aspiration, and desire. Have you ever wondered why there are so many Thai food restaurants nearby? I'm sure there are. I don't care who's listening. I'm sure there are Thai food restaurants near you. Why Thailand? Well, their government financially and politically supported a generation of entrepreneurs in designing, financing, and deploying restaurants all over the world as a part of a strategy known as gastro-diplomacy. At least a few of you listening when I said that thought to yourself, oh my god, I love Thai food. Yeah, that's what they were going for. It's advantageous to them for you to just like something about Thailand. That is its own kind of diplomacy. So then think of some of the other examples. Lederhosen, St. Patrick's Day, Cinco de Mayo, Bollywood, Hollywood, Swiss chocolate, pandas, anime, K-pop, reggae. You see it? Brazil cares so much about its football team in part because it wants to display Brazil as this beautiful, creative, expressive, free, and fun nation. It was a little weird for them when they won the '94 World Cup through a primarily defensive strategy. They had to win on penalties in a 0-0 match in the final against Italy. That ain't our style, you can imagine them saying. You know, in 2002 with Ronaldinho and Ronaldo, that just felt a little better. It was a little more us for them. So, in that way, football is a kind of soft power for many nations. The particular way in which that power is wielded is quite different throughout the world, however. Some wield their power on the pitch, with Italy displaying a historically very defensive strategy, and Germany being known for its stoic pragmatism. But some attempt to wield that soft power off the pitch, such as Qatar or the Saudis, through spending lots of money to host the World Cup in 2022 and 2034, respectively. Soft power is a way of exposing the rest of the world to your people, to your place, to your culture. And arguably, football is the most quintessential form of soft power there is. Billions of people watch this game, and every nation plays it. The fervor this game alights in people in every corner of the world can be truly outstanding. I mean, a single game, a single win, can be enough to motivate a Saudi man to rip his own front door off of his home with his bare hands. If you're a government, I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine not participating in that form of soft power somehow. It's even more unimaginable if you have the resources to do so substantially. All right, now we have to begin the China lecture. I mean, to begin to understand China's present focus, we have to understand their journey to becoming one of the superpowers on Earth. So, let me broad strokes a bunch of complex history. Wish me luck. So, the Qing dynasty from the early 18th century until the early 19th century managed to achieve pretty significant stability, territorial expansion, and a flourishing economy. This area of the world is doing quite well right now. But over time, the Qing bureaucracy began to become quite entrenched and rather stagnant in older, especially classical Confucian knowledge and mentalities. So this flourishing empire kind of became stuck in its ways. And additionally, their population rapidly ballooned while the bureaucracy was refusing. All right, maybe that's not quite fair. While the bureaucracy was adapting way, way, way too slowly to increase their staffing to sufficient numbers to actually manage their now burgeoning constituencies. The entire governance of the empire became more stretched and weakened, which allowed for significant corruption to take root. I mean, while the government is stretched, so too were the land resources. As the population grew and the bureaucracies remained stagnant, the economy stagnated, infrastructure crumbled, and wealth concentrated in the hands of some of the elites. And some ill timed natural disasters, including the repeated flooding of the Yellow River, sometimes called China's Sorrow, and repeated droughts, led to substantial food shortages. As the Qing weakened internally, foreign traders, especially the British, expanded the illegal opium trade into China. The spread of addiction, the drain of silver, and the broader social and economic disruption intensified the dynasty's crisis and helped set the stage for the Opium Wars. The defeats that followed further exposed Qing weakness, expanded foreign intrusion, and deepened the misery and instability already spreading across the empire. In that atmosphere of poverty, dislocation, and anger, massive internal upheaval like the Taiping Rebellion becomes possible. Oh, and go ahead and throw in a second Opium War, too. Why not? So the slow, dated, stretched government needed significant help from regional powers and foreign advisors to suppress the rebellion. So track this a bit. The Qing were a massive, prospering empire that got stuck in its ways and became weaker and weaker over time. They struggled to suppress corruption, had to rely on powerful regional forces, and invited foreign influence into their empire in an effort to cling to control. I mean, at this stage, a lot of people who are not the Qing dynasty itself are gaining power, money, and influence in China. It's not that the Qing didn't try to plug these gaps and respond to their ever weakening position. It's just that their self strengthening movement was too limited. The dynasty modernized parts of its military and industry, but without deeper institutional reform. China remained vulnerable, and that weakness would be badly exposed by Japan in 1894. As China modernized in pieces, it didn't really do so as a cohesive nation. Its provinces accumulated power, resources, and military capacity, but the center still lacked the authority to coordinate them effectively. The Qing suffered a humiliating defeat during the First Sino Japanese War, and the next generation inherited the same problem yet again in an even deeper form. A weaker center, stronger regional power brokers, and a nation still struggling to act as a unified one. That's the piece that I really mean for us to highlight. Each subsequent generation inherits the problems of the last. They don't just go away. As corruption takes root, future generations will have to deal with it somehow. As infrastructure breaks, future generations will have to deal with it somehow. These problems ain't going away. Historical problems cascade, and you'll begin to see what a nation is kind of fighting for and fighting against, what ideals they're fighting for and what ideals they despise. So the Qing dynasty finally falls after the 1911 revolution, and the Chinese Republic is born. But the warlords from those regional powers didn't just go away. So the new Chinese Republic was still struggling against power fragmentation and regionalism. Recentralizing after a period of significant fracturing is always deeply difficult. Powerful regional authorities and institutions don't just relinquish power easily, and the local populace in their present context would have turned their allegiance and or their compliance over to those that are in their backyard, wielding direct influence over their lives in the here and now. Remember, nations are concepts. So these people are just believing in the local concept more than the broader one, giving those regional powers much greater authority. People respond to the authority they see and feel. As warlords regionalized the Republic overall struggled to develop a cohesive vision or to execute any significant reforms. And if you're going to recentralize, you need a cohesive vision. This meant that the inheritance of crumbling infrastructure, the compounding effects of ongoing natural disasters, and the stagnation of the economy hasn't been solved much at all at this period. By remaining decentralized, the Republic couldn't grow. The populace remained tired and hungry. It's around this time that the educated elites more voraciously envisioned reunification, and two major thrusts were born. The Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, promised to rebuild the nation through strengthened centralization and international relations. The Communist Party, inspired by Marxist ideals, promised to rebuild society overall by focusing on the class struggle in China and planting itself on the side of the peasants, pushing for radical, ground up social reform. The two sides temporarily unified in the First United Front. They undertook a massive northern expedition, defeated the warlords, and actually temporarily united China. But these two sides did not see eye to eye, so their alliance dissolved as their common enemy dissipated. Remember that. Notably, those warlords that were defeated didn't just go away. They typically picked a side in the broader war, meaning that there were still significant concentrations of regional power on either side of the divide. Two sides within a nation disagree. They have military forces, and there's no centralized singular authority. Sounds like the makings of a civil war, don't you think? So each side built its power blocks. The nationalists built an army from within the urban centers, controlling ports and aligning with businesses and more centralized industry. The communists focused on the rural countryside, mobilizing peasants, organizing land reforms, and developing guerrilla tactics. Now, the nationalists tended to have significantly more formal military training and much stronger foreign support, especially from the United States. They also had institutional discipline, modern weapons, and controlled key cities and transportation tracks. The early war was overwhelmingly dominated by the nationalists. This led to the Long March, in which the communists were forced to retreat thousands of miles across mountains and rivers over the course of an entire year just to stay alive. The march was a survival campaign, but became a symbol of endurance, strength, resilience, toughness. Remember those traits from before? Remember those Chinese statues depicting tough tackling and a group of anonymous teammates entrenched together in a footballing battle? You see that thread? Now I'll remind you again that we inherit our vulnerabilities from past generations. Guess which one comes next? That history of corruption rears its head again, and this corruption amongst the nationalist elites starts siphoning off funds and weakening the movement from within. The communists strengthen their support amongst the peasants, adapt their tactics, and begin to push back. Then the Japanese invade amidst World War II. The two parties again unify temporarily to push back against the Japanese invaders, and eventually the Japanese Empire falls as the Second World War ends. Just as before, the common enemy disappears, so the infighting returns. The Chinese Civil War rages for about 3 more years until eventually the communists win out because of the same factors we already mentioned. The People's Republic of China is born, and the nationalists fled to Taiwan. But the communists inherit a fragile state. This nation has been devastated by war, natural disaster, fragmentation, corruption, famine, and infrastructure disintegration. At this point, for about 100 years. The People's Republic of China, now it's in 1949, inherits all of this. Time to start nation building, I guess. Initially, the communists attempt to keep good on their promises. I mean, one of the most notable reforms was their continued emphasis on land reforms. Throughout the nation, they broke up large estates, giving these plots of land to peasants as promised. As the communists took control of major factories, banks, and resource industries, they structured the entire economy to serve the central plan. They emphasized heavy industry, infrastructure, and export production. We'll see that this period of reforms didn't exactly hold, and there were many initial problems with this economic reorganization. However, the basic reforms did improve infrastructure, and the World Economic Forum has argued that this period of massive industrial and social investment served as the bedrock for the later successful growth enjoyed by the People's Republic. The public health initiatives and literacy campaigns drastically improved life expectancy and education. And together, these reforms built a workforce that was now ready to grow an economy. They invested heavily in industrial capacity through mills, factories, and universities. But the Republic instituted what was called the collective farming system that was structurally incapable of supporting productivity. The state owned and provided everything, and everyone was paid the same. All the products came back to the state, meaning that there was no incentive for hard work of any kind. Loafing yielded the same as trying. You see that? There's another one of those characteristics we gotta watch out for. This government championed the rallying of the soldiers in the Long March for their tenacity, togetherness, resiliency, and hard work and grit. And now, this republic is struggling against complacency and loafing. You see both sides of that? If you're the People's Republic, there are certain ideals that support your vision for the nation and certain ideals that threaten it. You know, individualism, well, that sounds a lot like those regional warlords that doomed the Qing dynasty and plagued the early Chinese Republic. Grit, resolve, togetherness, and toughness, well, that sounds like the strength that helped us to survive the Long March and supported us winning the war. So, what ideals do we mean to champion? Which ones represent our nation? It's got to be the ones that supported our rise to power. So, their ideals are solidifying, but their economy remains stagnant. It needs to break free of the collective farming system. And it does so through a series of economic reforms, most notably those in agriculture. One of the most important was called the Household Responsibility System. Ooh, that language is important. The Household Responsibility System. It reminds of some of the ideals of the People's Republic. Togetherness and hard work. Those are some of the ideals we mean to champion. Responsibility. It undermines the biggest problem we've been facing at this stage, loafing. Responsibility. And it evokes that old classical Confucian mentality. Responsibility. The reforms themselves were also highly effective. Instead of a farmer having to return 100% of the crop yield to the state, their state ration requirements were relaxed, and the household was permitted to keep the rest. Then, specialized economic zones were established in isolated regions to allow for freer commerce, essentially offering incentive to improve productivity and a means of growing capital. So now it's 1978, and the Chinese economy explodes. Well, now that I've yada yada yada'd the late 20th century in Chinese history, let's hard pivot to a completely different topic I've yet to introduce. FIFA. Oy. So if you're unaware, FIFA is the international governing body for football. The organization started in 1904 in Paris, and in the beginning, the goal was primarily to begin organizing matches between associations. It was a rather modest affair in its initial ambitions and commanded a tiny cachet globally. I mean, hell, England, the inventors of the game, didn't even join until a year later in 1905, and then they left, and then they joined again, and then they left, and then they did actually I mean, they did actually join and then they actually stayed. Scotland, arguably the other inventor, they joined in 1910, and that was after South Africa joined in 1909. You can kind of sense that even the people who invented the game aren't taking this thing terribly seriously. There's this kind of mentality of, well, maybe the home nations were being a bit hoity-toity, and I suppose there's some of that, but also it sort of suggests that FIFA just wasn't that big of a deal yet. A football association, in FIFA's eyes, is a governing body for football matches for an entire nation. And so FIFA is organized such that member associations join, but are limited to one per nation. There are exceptions to that rule, though. I mean, notice that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland is one nation in the early 20th century, but they eventually got 4 spots in FIFA. Well, actually, technically later, 5. Maybe we'll get into that sometime. But the core idea is that associations form, each association represents their nation, and no other governing body for football within that nation will be recognized by FIFA. FIFA then sets standards and rules and organizes matches and tournaments. I'm not exactly the rules thing, but it's just, we'll get into it later. FIFA is technically organized as something like a charity, a nonprofit. And in its early days, it really did seem to operate like this. Associations paid a membership fee to be in the organization, and that was kind of the entirety of the budget. If there were any additional costs, they were metaphorically passing around a hat to fund the most basic of operations. Anecdotes from the era depict the first president potentially covering some of these costs out of pocket. This economic model, however, would always hamper the growth of the organization. No matter how much people liked the product, the organization cannot grow if it does not make money somehow. Have you ever wondered why the Olympics aren't really a major international event for football? Even though they basically are a major event for basically every other team sport, at least those that play internationally. Well, enter Jules Rimet. As president of FIFA, Rimet had been spearheading an effort for FIFA to try to secure a tournament of its own, an international tournament of its own. This fervor only grew as he watched the success of international football at the Olympics, especially in the 20s. But FIFA certainly didn't have the money to foot the bill for such an event. We're in the middle of the Great Depression by the end of the 1920s. Air travel isn't a thing yet. Traveling by boat across the world is remarkably expensive. So kinda nice idea, Rimet, but come on. How are we going to make that happen? Uruguay comes out of nowhere, seemingly, and says, hey, we'll do it. Maybe not out of nowhere. They were good at football, having won the previous 2 Olympic tournaments. That's why they wear 4 stars over their crest on their men's kits, if you notice. It signifies 4 world championships, 2 of which were at the Olympics. But also Uruguay was celebrating their centennial, and the nation itself, not the football association, but the nation itself, was willing to leverage state funds to secure the prestige of hosting the World Cup. Soft power, right? Come and enjoy our nation and this game you love. Look how wonderful we are, and look how great we are at football. The definition of soft power. This is probably the first biggest example of the marriage between FIFA and nations attempting to wield soft power. They tied it to their centennial. You see that? So Uruguay essentially says, we'll pay for everything because what we're buying is your attention, your attendance, and hopefully your adoration. Now that's an economic model that FIFA can use moving forward. We have the game, and we'll let you borrow it for a summer as a means of wielding soft power. You take on all the expense and all the risk. We, the FIFA, will monetize the hell out of it. Of course, Italy is the next host, because Mussolini's regime wants the power that comes with hosting such a tournament. You see how this works? Football is power here. And for FIFA, power leads to money. But up to this point, FIFA is essentially still operating like an administrative hub, like an event organizer, and that's a far cry from the political and economic powerhouse that it eventually becomes. Until the 70s, FIFA wasn't extensively over monetizing every aspect of the game. It really was after the first tournament televised in color, the 1970 tournament in Mexico, won by Brazil, that Joao Havelange realized that FIFA needed to move beyond simpler economic models like selling tickets for matches to raise revenue. Only so many butts will go in seats. You can only build stadia so large. So a more ambitious economic plan must be devised. The product needed to break out of the stadium and make it into homes, as many homes as possible. Havelange turned FIFA into a profit-driven, not-for-profit, in name only, organization. Havelange capitalized on the technological advancements of the era to rapidly commercialize the tournament. Hordes of humans are all tuning into a singular event at the exact same time. Global brands will obviously and eagerly want to buy that captivation. We got a cash cow now, baby. So the technological advancement and hard pivot from Havelange began to rapidly hyper-monetize the World Cup tournament. But there are some other forces at play here, too. FIFA's charter is structured so that every member association, one per nation as you recall, gets one vote in the FIFA Congress. So Havelange's scheme to win the presidency to begin with was to promise more World Cup spots to African, Asian, and Latin American nations. Up to this point, the World Cup was mostly European, and it was capped at 16 teams for every edition until the 80s. In 78, 3 nations from outside of Europe and South America were awarded spots in the tournament. That's one entire nation from all of Asia, one entire nation from all of Africa, one entire nation from all of North America, Central America, and the Caribbean combined, 10 from Europe. Asian, African, and Latin American nations wanted in on the soft power game too. Plus, their associations just wanted to play at the highest international level in the most prestigious tournament in the world. So, why does the tournament expand to 24 teams in 82? Havelange is keeping his promise to those smaller non European nations votes in exchange for access. But Havelange also promised to fund footballing development programs all over the world, especially in poorer nations. How the hell's he going to pay for that? He got a buddy. The next major player here is Horst Dassler, the son of Adidas founder Adi Dassler. Dassler's role in the trajectory of FIFA cannot be overstated. He founded a sports marketing organization called International Sports and Leisure, ISL, in 82, and ISL partnered with Havelange and FIFA. ISL bought FIFA's marketing, sponsorship, and TV rights, and then sold those rights onward all over the world for a massive markup, raising eye-watering sums on the game. Havelange and FIFA now have play money And they can fund those generous development programs all over the world, just like they promised, like the fine philanthropic nonprofit organization that they were. Eh. One wrinkle: FIFA sold everything to ISL as a single block. I mean, that's the definition of all your eggs in one basket. Over time, ISL engaged in a repeated process of offering minimum guarantees to new federations and new sports markets in exchange for their marketing, sponsorship, and television rights packages across the world and across entertainment industries. They over relied on the money that they already had coming in from tournaments like the World Cup and the promise of profits from selling new packages onto other buyers with a massive markup to buy access to new events throughout the sporting landscape. They were fronting the cash in a bet that they could make the money back. ISL tried desperately to corner basically the entire world of sports marketing. Yeah, so in 2001 they went bankrupt because that didn't work. You can't just keep putting it on the card with the hopes of future returns. When it went bankrupt, everything that FIFA was doing in terms of marketing was tied up in this now insolvent estate. Overnight, FIFA basically had to absorb a ton of former ISL employees and quickly become their own marketing department, with many of the same players still in place. And to cover the losses from the ISL collapse, they seemingly misrepresented their losses and revenues, pulling future projected revenues into their current balance sheets to mask the true extent of their financial quagmire. But they survived. I gotta be honest with you. I've always been a bit more of a dog guy than a cat guy. I just feel like they're usually trying to be a part of your life a bit more. I mean, cats have always just felt a bit elusive to me. That said, I have had cats before. I've lived with them. And actually, if I'm honest with myself, I kind of did start to enjoy their company. I mean, the little buggers, they have a way of growing on you, you know? I mean, they're kind of just doing their thing, but it sort of works as a social tactic. And despite the fact that I'm allergic to them, and I prefer my canine buddies much more, I can't help but acknowledge that little bit of affinity I have for them. So I guess all that's to say that I kind of get how sometimes they can kind of weasel their way into your life, even if you aren't looking for them. And I suppose I can understand the mentality of the bloke who thinks, well, my kitty needs a friend. Yeah, and then one cat becomes two, and you think, well, I mean, I have to give them the most glorious life that I could possibly give them. They deserve the best. So I get that. They're like family. And, I mean, I guess if we have to give these two cats the absolute best life possible, then the only thing to be done is to rent them a penthouse apartment in an infamous high rise complex in New York, bankrolled through bribes and kickbacks from selling votes to World Cup hosting rights. It's the only way to make Little Whiskers happy. I get it. Makes perfect sense. I'm telling you, cats have a way of weaseling their way into our hearts. Nothing can be done about it. Hey, can I tell you about Chuck Blazer? Oh, this guy. What are you doing, man? Well, first, Let me oversimplify the 2008 financial crash in the United States, with, of course, reverberations abroad. From the early 2000s until 2008, banks in the United States tended to hand out mortgages like candy. Then, they would package these mortgages and sell them off to investors. But many of these homeowners who got these mortgages couldn't actually afford them, and they defaulted. So, the investments lost value and the financial system crashed. Subsequently, the US government passed TARP, a funding bill that spent oodles of money restabilizing the banks, restoring confidence, and helping to restart lending. Not wanting to get burned again, a series of important financial regulations were enacted, including stricter standards on mortgage lending. But a bunch of other financial protections went into place too. One of those, most relevant to our story, was a bill called the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and it required foreign financial institutions to report on U.S. account holders. But it also required U.S. banks to more closely scrutinize unusual financial patterns. As a result, in 2010, U.S. banks hired many more compliance officers and sent them to work monitoring suspicious transactions flowing in and out of their auspices. So Chuck Blazer's activities start to get their attention. They were seeing transactions like the one in 2008 that was labeled Diaspora Legacy Program to the tune of 10 million US dollars. Now, Blazer's activities had been rather suspicious for some time, but suddenly in 2010, there were a lot more talented eyes available around the world to start digging into transactions like this and exploring his and other people's activities. Blazer's pattern of receiving large dollar amounts and spending lavishly on his lifestyle, including purchasing a penthouse apartment for his cats. What are you doing, man? This pattern started to gain the attention of the IRS and the FBI, who again probably already were aware of Blazer to some degree, but now they really have the resources to pay a lot of attention to him. The human hours suddenly available to attend to his suspicious activities were suddenly much greater, in part because of the U.S. housing crisis and the eventually passed Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. The Diaspora Legacy Program on paper was meant to be a football development program, just like those programs that Havelange promised all over the world back in the day. Throughout Havelange's tenure, and into the early years of Sepp Blatter's presidency, his successor, FIFA reportedly sold major World Cup marketing, sponsorship, and television rights packages to ISL, helping turn commercial revenue into a central source of funding for FIFA's broader operations, including development programs, and after ISL started to just receive these monies much more directly. Significant amounts of money that were committed to these programs were diverted into the pockets of well-connected individuals or to the FIFA executives themselves, as is alleged in the charges eventually unsealed. Under this system, money could flow under the guise of development or legacy spending in exchange for political support inside the FIFA Congress, buying votes in presidential elections or executive committee votes in World Cup hosting contests. In a one member, one vote system as well, expanding the pool of member associations carried obvious political consequences too. Even if the formal justification was just football development and global representation, there was still a clear incentive to having more countries in the system. One member, one vote. Well, now we got more votes to sell. From 78 to 2012, as a result of this, the number of nations in FIFA ballooned from 142 member nations to 209. Now, the keen observer would notice that there aren't that many nations in the UN or in the Olympic Committee. I mean, FIFA was admitting territories like Montserrat, Guam, the Faroe Islands, Aruba as full voting members. So Blazer and his penthouse dwelling cats get caught by the compliance officers, investigated by the IRS, who notice he just wasn't filing any tax returns at all. What? And the FBI lean on him until he flips and gives up the system. In the unsealed charges in 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice alleged over 150 million US dollars in bribes and kickbacks. Blazer never serves jail time and dies in 2017. Havelange died in 2017 at the age of 100. Sepp Blatter, again the Havelange successor, was not immediately removed and actually won re-election one more time before he eventually pissed off a few more people, including the Swiss government, and was eventually forced out. So, two major events unearth this massive, decades long scheme of bribes and kickbacks. The collapse of ISL sees liquidators and bankruptcy administrators poring over the agency's books. Soon after, the American and Swiss authorities, with the help of Blazer and his kiddies, gain a detailed understanding of the patterns of fraud and corruption inside FIFA itself. And then, of course, subsequently, the Swiss authorities seize FIFA's files themselves and dig into the books. The evidence shows that this system of bribes and kickbacks dated all the way back to the beginning of Havelange's tenure in the 70s. FIFA had been steeped in corruption for more than 40 years. Football is a weird game. It requires specific technical skills that, if they don't develop at an early age and in a particular way, the human body just never seems to really catch up. I've played this game since I was 5, and I've been around it a lot in my life. And almost any experienced player can kind of spot in an instant almost any latecomer to the game. If a person comes to the game late, sometimes as late as 10 or 12 years old, they just kind of look weird when they strike the ball. The hips, they just don't move quite right. It looks stiff. And those biomechanics affect how the player plays. Matt Turner of the Revolution and the U.S. men's national team is a goalkeeper, and he started playing when he was 14 years old. The dude is legitimately an incredible athlete, and he played for the US at the 22 World Cup. He's far better than I will ever be at distributing the ball with his feet out of the back. But as the game has evolved to demand that goalkeepers be good with their feet and be able to play out of the back, Turner struggled. I mean, watching him play, you can tell that he worked on it, and relative to most professional teams across the entire world, the dude is elite. But he does make mistakes, and teams at the very highest level really don't want to take a chance on him anymore. I think he could still likely, at the time of recording, probably play for one of the clubs in the Big Five leagues, but not someone like Arsenal, and not someone at the top of really any of those Big Five divisions. He just struggled with distribution, and then seemingly lost confidence and started to struggle with decision making, positioning, and shot stopping, which were a lot of his strengths before. When all of that started to happen, he crashed out of the league. No matter how hard he works on this, he'll always likely just hit that ceiling in his technical passing and distribution skills. It's a biomechanical thing. Now, there are exceptions, but I find that there are very, very few. And so, a decent rule of thumb is that if you want to be good at this game, you kind of need to start when you're like 6. Everything else is too late. So that means that a nation wanting to be good at the game needs to have staffing and facilities and programming in place at about 6 years old and all the way through the development timeline to train players at the specific skills they need at each age bracket to create elite footballers. One of the problems the Americans used to have was that men's players were going to college and playing from 18 to 22 before entering the professional ranks at about 23 years old. That works for other American sports, but football is just different. By about 17 and certainly by 18, you need to start knocking on the door of the first team, getting minutes. 23 is way too late. I used to be really into Florida State basketball, and I remember Leonard Hamilton loved to find these massively tall dudes from Slavic or African nations. They were often 2.23 meters tall, 7'4" for the American sensibilities, or taller, and many of them had never played basketball before, but he would give them a crash course on how to play, and he'd chuck them into the team at 18 years old. And these dudes were pretty good. Those teams were fun to watch. But you could never grab a kid of any athletic ability at 18 years old and teach them to play the game in a summer, even at a high amateur level, even if you spent a lot of time trying. A guy like that probably wouldn't be good enough for my Sunday team, let alone a college or professional squad. The biomechanics for the technical side of football are just weird. To control and manipulate the ball the way that you need to make things happen requires early development. It just does. So if you want to create elite players, you need to have coaches in place with a place to coach by the time that kids are about 6 years old. If you need a place to coach, you need to have already constructed facilities and pitches all throughout your nation ready for 6-year-olds to attend. And those coaches need to have been trained already in how to train 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds in developing the specific skills they need at each of these technical developmental milestones. All of this infrastructure and institutional knowledge must be in place already by the time that you mean to begin to develop a 6-year-old. That means that you need coaches who have experience in the game already. They should be wrapping up their careers already and ready to train by the time that you have a 6-year-old ready to begin development. So if a typical footballer wraps up their career and starts coaching at around 35 to 40 years old, then your coaches should have been entering the top levels 16 to 18 years before that. They should have been hitting their peaks around 7 to 12 years before you need them to begin to be ready to coach. And then you need them to coach for around 11 years before they begin to produce the very first players that should begin to be breaking into the first teams of high level clubs. And let's not forget, the first generations of coaches also don't have any coaching mentors to teach them how to coach. They're relying on their own experiences and possibly some international connections. Plus, they too didn't have high level domestic coaching. So they may end up propagating some bad habits or utilize some unsophisticated approaches. Let's look at the timeline again. In the 70s, China was solidifying its economy, and finally by 78, they were making the largest shifts that truly set them on the trajectory toward the economically elite category. But their economy was still pretty closed off and suspicious of capitalism and outsiders. So, from 62 to 78, the Chinese national team didn't even attempt to qualify for the World Cup. Let's keep going with this side by side. In the 80s, China began to integrate more substantially into the global trade network. But this takes time, and they weren't fully integrated yet in the way that we see today. On the qualifying side, China lost to New Zealand in the 82 qualification playoff finals to fail to qualify for the newly expanded Thanks Avalanche World Cup. During the 86 qualification campaign, they couldn't get out of their first round group. They fell behind Hong Kong. That's a glorified city-state, beating one of the most heavily populated nations on the planet. For the 1990 campaign, they finished fourth in the qualification finals behind South Korea and the UAE. Going into the 90s, China loosened their state controls over the economy. They encouraged private entrepreneurship, privatized state-owned enterprises, developed special economic zones that were aimed at attracting foreign investment, and they heavily pushed toward manufacturing and exporting. They implemented banking, trade, and currency policy reforms and laid the groundwork for their eventual entry into the World Trade Organization, which is something of a milestone moment indicating their real entry into the global trade economy. During the 94 campaign, China couldn't get out of the first round, finishing behind Iraq. During the 98 cycle, they made it to the second round, but finished third in their group behind Saudi Arabia and Iran. China most fully entered the Economic Community of Nations in 2001, the very year that ISL collapses. So in 2001, China is ready to begin wielding their might on the global game. But by this stage, they'd really only ever had two players playing in the big five European leagues at all. And both of these players had actually joined relatively recently from 98 to 2001, and they weren't at the biggest clubs. They did actually qualify for the 2002 World Cup, but partially they did so because Korea and Japan automatically qualified as hosts, and so they were removed from the qualification cycle. That qualification campaign also concluded in October of 2001. That means that at the moment that China is ready to begin pushing more forcibly into the footballing soft power game, their entire pool of potential coaches with high-level professional pedigree was two. Both of those professionals were still playing, and neither of them really got into coaching after their playing careers concluded. Moreover, they had never qualified for a World Cup against a full complement of Asian opponents. China was, and still is, developmentally behind. When ISL collapsed, global brands began to grow more uncomfortable with FIFA, given the murmurings about financial irregularities. FIFA is in a financial crisis and is scrambling to fill financial gaps. They're sensing the discomfort amongst some of their most historically reliable partners, and they need new marketing partners. And they need money. This happens at the exact same time that China enters the global trade market, beginning its rise to becoming an economic powerhouse. FIFA's financial crisis happens right when China has money and motivation to flex their soft power muscles. FIFA needed money. China wanted in on the soft power game. A match is made. But how? What can China buy? I mean, given that last segment, you can see that there's no way to spend oodles of money to suddenly develop elite players to start immediately winning games. They don't have the infrastructure and institutional knowledge in place. The landscape of Chinese businesses at this stage in 2001 is a mixture of state-owned enterprises still under governmental control, recently privatized entities that were previously state-owned, joint ventures involving a partnership between foreign capital firms and Chinese private industry, novel domestic entrepreneurial entities, and fully foreign companies in the early stages of operation in China. But all of these shifts were in their infancy. Marketing strategies for these new and shifting businesses were still developing. So grandiose marketing strategies and capital were just not quite in place yet. Moreover, when ISL failed, The agreements with major brands for sponsorship of the 2002 and 2006 World Cups were still in place, despite the fact that some brands were growing uncomfortable with their ties to FIFA. There was enough contractual momentum to ensure that these brands locked down the advertising products for the next two World Cups. China isn't ready to buy a ton of advertising yet. FIFA doesn't have anything to sell in terms of World Cup advertising and rights just yet. As evidence for this motivation, take a peek at the ad boards for the 2002 and 2006 World Cup. Compare them to the ad boards for the 2010 World Cup. A lot of the old giants made way for a lot of new Chinese brands. Now you know why. So FIFA wants to sell, China wants to buy. But what's the product? Where did football come from? Like, who actually invented the game? I mean, often you'll hear that the British did. When I was coming through school, I heard that it was invented by the Greeks. There were Mesoamerican ball games, Japanese and Roman ball games. There were indigenous Australian and African ball games. Many of these games were kicking games. So scholars seem overwhelmingly to agree that these different variants of kicking games weren't actual evidence of cultural exchange. They were just evidence of a kind of a basic human impulse. You give humans a ball, they'll kick it. Eventually, they'll make rules around it. Scholars are pretty consistent in their sentiment that there is no link from any of these ball games to the contemporary kicking game found in the British Isles, at least until we have the earliest evidence of a game called folk football. But to restate the major point here for clarity, there is no link between our football and the ancient kicking games from around the world. So, of course, in 2004, FIFA announced publicly and confidently that Cuju, an ancient Chinese kicking game, is the definitive origin of the sport that we know today. Now, again, there isn't anything special about Cuju relative to the ancient kicking games all throughout the world. It isn't the oldest. It isn't the one that's most similar to today's rules. There's no evidence linking it to the trade networks that might have brought it over to the British Islands. Nothing like this exists. In fact, the Roman game was brought to the British Islands, and the scholars still insist that there's no clear link indicating that the Roman game is or was the definitive origins of football. As a species, we play games. We play all kind of games all over the world. Stuffing a bladder with some stuff and throwing it, chasing it, kicking it, tackling, hitting. These are just some things that you can do with a stuffed bladder. It ain't special. It's just a thing we do. Give humans a ball, they'll kick it. China couldn't really buy a good national team. They couldn't buy a good league, and they couldn't buy ads or TV rights yet. Ellis Cashmore, Ramsey Foz, and Simon Cockerell have all indicated their belief that FIFA's declaration that Cuju is the origins of football was essentially a financial transaction. It looks like China found their product. These and other authors argue what China bought was the history of the game. How does that work as soft power? Well, first, FIFA makes a grand announcement, which brings the attention of the footballing world to China temporarily. Then, they build a museum exploring the history of the development of football from Cuju to the present day, which again is not factual. Following this, a bunch of YouTubers repeat this fact without checking it. I'll note that the top two History of All of Football videos on YouTube confidently repeat this claim about Cuju, and China. And then, football is kind of forever credited by FIFA and others for inventing the game they didn't invent. It's propaganda. China can achieve a kind of rhetorical superiority by essentially saying, we aren't failing to play your game well, you're honoring the game we invented for you. How kind of you to honor us in that way. Cuju is not the origin of football any more than any of the other kicking games from all around the world. Folk football is the clear link to the contemporary game that was later developed in schoolyards and Scottish and British clubs, codified into existence in a British pub, and initially proliferated by amateurs. So there's this statue in Rio de Janeiro of Pele battling for a ball against the ancient Chinese emperor Han Wudi. The emperor seems to be beating Pele to the ball. The Chinese emperor is victorious over one of the greatest players in the history of the sport. What's this thing doing here? Well, sometimes nations have an impulse toward wielding their power abroad, and one way of wielding soft power is to build football statues. China's communist impulses tend not to want to celebrate individuals, as championing individuals might represent something of a threat to the elites and the power holders. So they might tend to prefer to depict a more abstract player winning a tackle, rather than a Chinese footballing hero depicted in some iconic moment. Winning a tackle is more in keeping with the values the nation means to embody, like the grit and hard work and toughness displayed by those communist soldiers amidst the Long March. At a moment in history when FIFA needed money because of decades of financial mismanagement and corruption, the Chinese economy was finally coming online, enough to begin to capitalize on the economic opportunity that a FIFA partnership might bring. Without access to other products and with little hope of building a truly successful football playing culture, the only conceivable high-value product that China could buy was the rights to the rhetorical origins of the game itself. This allowed China to save face. They're saving face respective to their languishing footballing culture by framing the issue as, we aren't bad at your game, you are playing our game. China, allegedly, buys this rhetorical endorsement from FIFA and commissions a statue depicting the Han Emperor of the era when Cuju was played. They show the Chinese emperor superior to the most iconic player from the most iconic footballing nation in the history of the world, as a means of displaying their rhetorical superiority to Brazil and the rest of the world, as a means of displaying their power to the world. You see it? These world leaders are not treating this game like it is an unimportant thing. They're spending oodles of money crafting very particular narratives about their nation, their people, their relevance, their superiority. They've always done this, and they're continuing to do so. To them, it isn't about winning a game. It's about influence. It's about influencing us, the consumer. When we tune into these matches, we must understand on some level that we are being manipulated. The entirety of what's going on is hidden from us, for now. But whatever it is, We're seeing what's happening for a reason, an important reason. We're not looking at a silly little game. We're a part of the Emperor's chess match, even if only as a flank pawn. It's our attention and adoration they want. They are fighting wars against one another, proxy or otherwise, but they are also doing this. It's both and. We're all subject, to some degree, to the whims of those in power, in our place in time. It's a reality of life. And it just so happens to be that because we, the people in this time, do this thing called football, then part of the life that we will live will involve those powers investing in our thing as a means of influencing us. It's just a part of life. The game is life.